Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us by phone, Osita Nwanevu, the contributing editor at The New Republic and columnist at The Guardian, and also the proprietor of his ghost newsletter that is the rival to Substack, and also apparently getting very popular at Osita. Nwanevu.com. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Osita, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So the big news, obviously, in the past 24 hours is that the U.S. and U.K. have essentially bombed Houthi controlled areas of Yemen in response to what has been like a 6-week, 8-week campaign by the Houthis of essentially firing upon and in some instances boarding and civilian ships in the Red Sea as a way of protesting the assault of the Israelis on Gaza. Give me your first thoughts on this, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, to the extent I understand it, I think it's probably best understood as another theater of Israel's offensive against Gaza. These attacks on the ships are happening because they're an effort to sort of arrest international commerce as a way of trying to pressure Israel and its backers to cease the assault on Gaza. So I think it's best understood as an extension of that story, which we've all been following, obviously, for the last several months. And, you know, I tend to think, as I've written before and we talked about before on social media, the best way to resolve this conflict is going to be a negotiated ceasefire. We're seeing a terrible, terrible offensive. I'm sure we're going to talk about what's happening at The Hague right now. But, you know, this is an extension of a horrible and, from my perspective, immoral war. And the American response to the Houthis right now, as many people have said in Congress, is being conducted without fulfilling the norm of requiring Congress's approval to engage in military action. There's this ongoing debate about whether or not, the extent to which Article 1 powers still apply. There have been so many loopholes shot into that thing over the last however many decades. It's practically Swiss cheese now. But I do tend to believe that it's important for the presidents, when they do things like this, to seek the broader approval of the public rather than kind of doing them unilaterally, especially in this case where I think more and more Americans are perturbed by what's been going on in Gaza and don't really feel that the United States should be backing a horrible and immoral war. On
the authorization front, I think in 2020 we have a Joe Biden tweet. Do we have that tweet? I put it into the Slack. Joe Biden tweeted out in response to Trump's attack on Soleimani.
Here we go. I have it here if you want me to read it. Let's be clear. This one, Donald Trump does not have the authority to take us into war with Iran without congressional approval. A president should never take this nation to war without the informed consent of the American people. He also had other statements about not getting us involved in the Middle East that he's immediately contradicting now that he's in power. So, it's quite clear that Congress should have been consulted per the
apparently
Constitution.
they were consulted, but the real question is whether they should give their consent. I mean,
yes.
And this is, what's interesting to me too about this, Osita, is that this was ostensibly a function of Operation Prosperity Guardian, and. If you're going to set up Operation Prosperity Guardian, which involved, I guess, a 20-member coalition that ostensibly was there to deter the Houthis from attacking these vessels, I mean, wouldn't that have been the time to get authorization from Congress? Because presumably, that's what you're set up to do, is to attack anybody who's attacking these vessels.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, I didn't know what legal strategy the administration is pursuing. I did read something a couple hours ago about the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the extent to which presidents over time have engaged in a strategy where, you're required to inform Congress within 48 hours of any unilateral action taken by the executive, and then anything that you're doing is limited within a 60-day window. But over time, presidents have found ways to finesse this and report things in such a way that they're constantly extending the 60-day window. And I mean, there are all kinds of, shenanigans that go into the planning and justifying operations like these. But I think you're right that the more fundamental question here is not really about the legalities of the authorization, although that's important, but fundamentally, like, should we be trying to deal with what's going on in Gaza by expanding the conflict, which is what I think these attacks do. Should we sort of play whack-a-mole with anybody who might have anything, who might be in opposition to what's going on in Gaza, or should we try to resolve the situation by pushing for a ceasefire, which I think would be more productive and doesn't risk escalating and broadening the conflict into a wider regional war.
Well, that's what the Houthis are saying. I mean, you don't necessarily need to take them at their word, and we don't need to love Houthis. And I've been saying this, like, I'm not voting for them for class president or whatever, but they've been clear that they're doing this in order to put economic pressure on the United States and Israel, and using like their regional kind of connections near the Red Sea, which is one of the most important shipping lanes in the world, in order to put that kind of pressure on the United States, feels quite straightforward. And perhaps instead of illegally striking Yemen without authorization, maybe Biden could try the ceasefire first and see if the Houthis would cease their blockade and this bombing of these commercial ships, which is what they're saying they would do. Like, maybe try that first before bombing Yemen without authorization.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly makes sense to me. I mean, I don't think it makes sense to frame what's going on, as I think some people are, as kind of, well, this is a kind of chaotic, illogical attack on the Houthis' part, or, an extension of piracy or something like that. There's a very clear strategic objective that is worth taking seriously. And I just don't know that, even from a logical standpoint, set the ethics of what's going on inside, even from a logical geopolitical standpoint, expanding the conflict in this way doesn't seem to me to be the wise course for Biden here.
This is the thing that I find sort of really sort of difficult to parse out, because and I put up this graphic because one of my theories is, and you can't see this this cartoon, but we're going to put up this cartoon. It is military, U.S. military jumping out of paratroopers jumping out of a plane. This is from ages ago. And one paratrooper turns to the other. This is your first re-election campaign, kid, asking a question. And like I'm trying to find the sort of like the rationale here. What the Houthis are doing is very much in their benefit. Apparently, from their perspective, they're having troubles, in terms of like having to govern now, as opposed to be waging this ongoing conflict between, the bombing campaign that had gone on for years from Saudi Arabia with an assist from the United States. And so in terms of strengthening themselves domestically, the U.S. and U.K. and whomever attacking them is a benefit. All of this seems to have been like relatively predictable, as you say. This is not a random thing by the Houthis. And I mean, certainly, like, within the first week of Israel's attacks, response to the attacks on October 7th, we were doing interviews about the expansion of this conflict. And it seems like the Biden administration, it is unclear that there's any price that they aren't willing to pay. And I mean, both in terms of like U.S. foreign policy interests and just crass political cost associated with it in support of Israel's complete unfettered, right to respond and kill as many civilians as they deem necessary or want to kill. I mean, that's what I find so bizarre about this. There is not even like the typical, realpolitik associated with this.
Yeah, it's been really remarkable to watch. And the argument has always been on Biden's part, well, we'll make these public statements, but you should know that behind the scenes we're doing everything we can to sort of encourage Israel to change course. We had that story a couple of days ago, I think, about Israel moving to a different stage of the offensive in Gaza. It's going to be more targeted. But that's all kind of talk. What we see happening right now is the same fundamental conflict I think we've seen since early October. I think we're at 23,000 or so Palestinians who've been killed. The bombings are continuing. On Israel's part, the putative objective of rescuing the hostages has been kind of a joke. I think they've rescued one in offensive action. They've killed several. I think the 100 or so that have been released through negotiations with Hamas, I believe. So there's a lot of what seems like irrationality happening, both in terms of Israel's own justification of what's going on, but also our willingness to back it to the hilt. And I think what's interesting about that meme that you mentioned, I have seen that cartoon before, is that it was, it's from ages ago. And I think maybe back to the early Iraq days or something, where I think the standard line in American politics when it came to foreign conflict was, well, when presidents really are having trouble domestically, when they need people to rally around them, they might engage in some kind of foreign adventure that'll rally, the flag, create this kind of rally around the flag effect. I don't think we're in that same political world anymore. I think that Americans are very, very wary of international conflict generally, Middle Eastern conflict, specifically after Iraq. And I don't think that, any of this has been helped Biden at all since October. I think that he's losing key constituencies within the Democratic Party base. We'll see if they come back over the course of the year as that we move into a general election. But all of this has been tremendously politically costly because I think we're in an environment now where Americans are so weary and tired of resources being expended to no real purpose in the Middle East. And in ways that actually probably make us less safe. I think that's the fundamental reality of this. And if Biden can't see that, he's blind. It's really mystifying to watch.